Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for the Home Instead Aging Well series, Culinary Delights. We're so happy that you're with us today as we talk about eating well. So eating is one of the most basic human needs, but though we often have an abundance of food in the US, our diets don't necessarily reflect that in quality. And many times fast food is often the choice of the busy. But slowing down and breaking bread, especially with a loved one, can be a nutritious and rewarding way to eat. We are going to talk about all things eating well today. But before we get started, I just want to mention that anytime you have a question, go ahead and throw that question in the chat because we do have someone monitoring. And also, no need to scribble down the recipe. We're gonna send it to you after we're all done here today. But first, let's talk about who's joining us today at the Metropolitan Utilities District Culinary Theater at the Fort Omaha campus and Metropolitan Community College. We have Chef Chase Grove, who is a culinary educator focused on the science of food, and Shan Wilkins from Home Instead.
Good morning.
Chef, let's start with you. What are we gonna be cooking today?
So today we have a garbanzo and green soup, and this is a little bit of a hybrid of a few different soups that I like, that I felt particularly, it sounded really good to make, so I wanted to share it. So it's kind of takes the Spanish garbanzo bean sausage soup and combines it with the zuppa toscana kind of category of soup to make this really kind of unique hybrid that we don't see as the soup itself, because it's kind of piecemealing what we like of different things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to maybe piecemeal yourself and why this soup is good and why I combined those.
Fantastic. And this time of year is the perfect time of year to have soups. Everybody's thinking about all things soups.
Absolutely. It's good for it getting colder and kind of feeling like it's just a natural thing to go to as we get chilly temperatures. But I also love going into soups this time of year for kind of practical reasons, which we'll talk about today, I think.
Great, thanks. And Shan, we are going to talk about all things nutrition. Soups are nutritious and they're an easy way to feed yourself and to feed your family, especially if you're a senior, whether you're living alone or you want to share a meal with someone.
Yeah, you can put them in a jar, put them in their fridge. They last longer usually. It's easy for someone to heat up and have, a week or two later down the road. Can you freeze soups?
Yes, some
in
soups
baggies?
in baggies or Tupperware. I call them delis. There's a bunch of ways to go about it. We'll talk about what soups freeze best and what ones have a little bit more risk in them.
And I love chili
Oh yeah,
this time of year. Yeah.
very filling.
Fantastic. Well, if you want to get started
Yeah,
cooking.
thank you.
So Shan, let's talk a little bit about some tips for aging population, because we know that your needs change, but really with soup season here, I think it's pretty easy to add fruits and vegetables to soups.
Yeah, if you have a soup, you don't have to necessarily have a potato, and most of the time I think the soup can be the main dish, and then strawberries are really good on the side. Melons, I think melons stay in season a long time, cantaloupe, that type of thing. So yeah, you can really change it up with soups, and it can be the main dish instead of one of, 5, like in the fancy dinners, is it 5?
The different coursings.
Yeah.
It takes so many things from other courses as we think about them in the dining world that they can be self-sustaining. And then I love the idea of having just a little something simple on the side, especially moving into fall. Pears, apples are peak season.
Oh, yeah.
Totally a go-to.
And you could dip it into the caramel for dessert. Caramel.
That would be
that's a great
there you
dessert.
go.
Fun
Caramel,
splurge.
dip it into peanut butter.
Yeah.
Maple is popular this time of year.
And I think it's easy to make a soup with people. It's not, I do semi-homemade. So I go buy the soup I like, the brand I like, and then I just add more ingredients to that. But it's pretty easy. My kids, it's pretty easy to make when they're at home, and I still get to have time with them, and I'm not a million hours in the kitchen when they're home visiting.
Yeah, I think of soups as like passive effort. Like a pan's going and developing and changing, and you're cooking it, but it's not like you're like laboring over it the whole
Right.
time. You can interact with family. in a really good way. And I like that you brought up, like, I think of them as loopholes, things that you can buy value added, like stock. It's not like I'm making my own stock right now, or garbanzo beans. We're not going from dry. Like, take those moments to find products on the market that do save you a little time and you're not sacrificing anything.
Absolutely. And I find, I don't know your opinion on this, Chef, but I find if I throw anything in some broth and have it cook in a pressure cooker for a period of time, it tastes pretty good.
Yeah, it's actually just before I came up here to start this, I was flipping through a regional cuisine book around the world. I kept flipping through and finding these soups that I'm like, oh, like, that's really cool, different combination of vegetables, and then another, and then another. So it's really hard to fail at soups, that if you have some ingredients at home and you put them together with a good broth and season it, you'll probably have a good soup.
And it's so filling too. I mean, depending on the type of soup you get, it could help you hydrate. It could provide additional fiber. It's an easy way to get protein.
Yeah, soups are good.
That, you mentioning protein kind of led me into this soup. So this soup from the Zuppa Toscana section of its origins has potatoes in it, but sometimes when I have potatoes at home, I don't go through them quick enough. I mean, they hold up for a while, but there's always still that one or two that like grows or gets mushy. So I love garbanzo beans. You can buy them canned and already cooked. I mean, they stay in the can forever, and then you can crack into them whenever you want. And I use them as a starch replacement that also has some protein in it.
I really enjoy garbanzo beans because I find that I can make them into anything. Their texture, they're a pretty firm bean compared to other beans. And so they add texture, they add flavor, you can roast them, you can throw them in a soup. I just pretty much enjoy them.
Is that the bean that, what's the dip? There's a dip.
Hummus.
Yes,
Yep.
is that the bean used in hummus?
Yep, some people call them chickpeas.
Okay.
Yep,
okay.
same thing.
Yep.
Puree them and then add a little bit of sesame. It's called tahini, and then it's easy hummus. So like in the summer, I don't want to make like a heavy soup, so I make hummus.
Gotcha.
So I just want to mention that right now, Chef Chase is cooking some bacon and it smells heavenly in here. So when you're cooking at home, that's just one of the benefits. So when we're enjoying our food, the way it smells gets you prepared to eat.
I think it makes it easier to have harder conversations too when you're cooking food and eating food. It's harder to get upset, I think.
I love that.
So having maybe difficult conversations over food is a good suggestion.
I think so. You know, you got to take a breath and take a bite at some point. So.
It also has this parameters of we're at a meal, like we're sharing an event together, and it has a beginning and it has an end.
Yes.
So any hard conversation or something that, even if it's not a hard conversation, just something that gave you anxiety to bring up within family or friends, it's a perfect moment for that.
I think it's also a good way to share from generation to generation the previous generations, maybe traditions and some life experiences when they pass down a recipe, you know, where'd the recipe come from, that type of thing.
Just cooking in general, just passing down those familial traditions. So right now it's October and we're looking toward the holiday season. I know many people are getting excited about those traditions that are getting ready to come, or that are getting ready to happen, and so many are tied to food.
Right. Well, and it's so funny. We were talking earlier. I always thought, I think I've discovered like something new. And recently I've been on this ice water lemon kick, fresh lemon. And I was so excited. I'm like, oh, I discovered this. So I was talking to my mom. She's like, yeah, you know that's not new, right? I'm like, huh? She's like, I think your grandma even told me about that. I'm like, thanks. Thanks for, you know, blowing my bubble up. But so I just think we think some things are new and they're probably not. And if we slow down a little bit and talk to our elders, we would find that they've probably already done that. They already know that, or they have a shortcut in the kitchen that we didn't even think about a lot of times. So
I love that. That's a good lesson in the kitchen as a professional. Like, try to think of these new fun combinations, but someone somewhere has had these ingredients. and done it. And maybe they did it better or maybe a little different, but discovering that and talking about it's fun.
Like mayonnaise in cakes.
Yes.
First time I heard that, I was like, what? And it's been going on for a long time.
Well, I saw a recipe that said, and I think that it was called a mayonnaise cake, and I said, oh, that's so disgusting. But then I looked at it, and then I reviewed it, and the mayonnaise was to add moisture.
Right.
So even though they called it a mayonnaise cake, and we probably call it something different today, I mean, it was a pretty bomb recipe.
Right, and then there's another one. I've seen people take a can of Coke and put it in their sloppy joes or their taverns.
Yep.
And why do they do that? I don't even know why.
I mean, it provides sweetness, of course,
Okay.
and flavor.
All right. Okay.
But what's in that Coke or the root beer or whatever you do it also helps tenderize what you're cooking it with.
Oh, all right.
Oh, okay. So I'm learning something
Yeah.
new already.
Yeah, so there can be a good use for Coke, not
Yes.
necessarily.
Knocking back a can, yeah.
Right. It's little things like that people have already invented. And if we just take the time, during the holidays it's this season, I think people cook from now until January. People are getting ready for Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the New Year. So it's interesting and their take on how they prepare different dishes. And I like to see what families eat. A lot of families now don't eat the traditional turkey and ham at Thanksgiving and Christmas. People are doing different things, and it's always fun. If families get together for cooking day. I know a lot of people that do
That's
that.
fun.
They'll run a professional kitchen because they have so many family members they can't get it done in one house. I always think that's kind of neat.
It's a good
Well, I
idea.
think it's so interesting that families have their own tradition, and those are the things that we hold closest to. So I went over to somebody's house and they said, okay, so we eat goulash for Thanksgiving, and I was thinking, goulash? Well, their family is Scandinavian, and so they had some things on the table that I had never seen on a Thanksgiving table. So they had goulash and they had beets. I had never had beets on my Thanksgiving table, but it was really interesting to participate in somebody else's traditions.
Well, and it was funny. I was reading an article about Thanksgiving, and the settlers probably did not have turkey. They probably had pheasant or something like that.
Some game bird, yep.
Yeah, they probably did not have turkey. So I thought that was rather interesting how over time generations develop their own tradition and change things, but then history records it a different way. So they probably did not have turkey.
Oysters is the other big one that I like.
Yes, I read
Yep.
that too, that they probably had oysters.
Oh, wow. So maybe that goes back to the tradition to have the oyster stuffing?
Yep,
Because I always
there it is.
wondered where
Yep.
that came from. I'm like, why would we have oyster stuffing?
Yep.
Right, and it makes sense. Where they landed at, there was water. So I'm sure
Yep.
maybe they had shrimp too. Who knows?
You know,
Lobster,
Shane,
that sounds nice.
Yeah.
Shane, you were talking previously about stories and learning stories from our senior population, and really that is knowledge that we need to embrace because older people have stories to tell if we'll listen.
Right. So I was thinking this last week about all the technology and how easy it is to get information, and seeing some interviews and stuff. We can't always rely on what we're reading online. And I remember we talked about this when we were younger. It took us a little work to get our information, and the news was only on for 1 hour. It was a half hour of the local news and a half hour of the national news, and we only had 3 TV channels. Now everything is
Right.
just in your face and it's accessible 24/7. And so I think we lose some of the history and the meaning and the perception of what happened. COVID, for instance, we talked about, there was a whole generation that went through something similar. Well, we have people around us that lived during that time. Yeah, I think it was the Spanish flu. And if you just would have took some time, I think if we as a culture would have took some time and had a conversation with some people that actually experienced it, we might have handled it a little differently. But we, as a society, we didn't take a breath. We just acted. And when we had, a plethora of information by people that had actually lived it firsthand, and we didn't stop. We did not stop to ask them how they handled it. And I talked to a group in a retirement community recently, and they said they spent a year in lockdown during that time. And their stories were really interesting, how they interacted with their neighbors and how they still had that sense of community. And they thought that this COVID round, we felt more isolated than they did back then, and they didn't have all the technology. They didn't have the TVs and all that kind of stuff that we have now. And they said they felt less isolated.
Wow.
It was because they still had a sense of culture, and they didn't have a phone in their hand 24/7. They didn't have a TV. They had to depend on each other. So it was rather interesting.
Well, that modern technology can provide a false sense of connection.
Yep.
And so maybe that's what they're referring to. So it's not like necessarily you can engage, but you can be a voyeur versus being someone who actually engages.
Yeah, it's almost like it's okay to socially isolate. It's, you can send any message you want. You're over an internet connection, your face isn't attached. You're not really responsible directly. But when you don't have that, and you have to interact, and you have to look somebody in the eye, or you know your neighbor is sick, and they know you, it gives you a sense of wanting to help them versus isolating. So I think technology is a double-edged sword. I think it's great. I think we have to be cautious on how we use it and advance with it. But don't forget, we have people that have lived, and they may be able to guide us through some things. So.
Absolutely. The New York Times had an article, and what they mentioned is that while in some seniors brain function slows, the wisdom increases. The wisdom, there has been no effect to the wisdom.
Right. No, I agree with that. I sometimes think we think they cognitively they have slowed down, but I think they're just wise enough to process and answer nicely instead of just answering what they're really thinking.
Instead of saying, what are you doing, dummy? They're
Right.
thinking of a nice way to...
Let me think about that.
Yeah.
Now, you just said, yeah. And it's a matter of up to us to sit down and hear what they have to say, record that, which is great for technology. There's a lot of great ways to record a loved one's history, and I think people should do that. But having the conversation, hearing, firsthand the challenges from their perspective instead of just reading it in an article or from a supposed news person, you don't know anymore who's real and who's not. So I think it's really important that we slow down and talk to our aging adults. And the best way to do that is, hey, you got a recipe for this? Can you come cook with me? Can you show me how to do that?
Right.
And that'll lead into another conversation, into another one. And then it'll lead to a tradition.
Right.
Yep, I love that. There's been this generation of, as the family unit got more and more busy, cooking got pushed back further on the priorities. So there was a loss of oral cooking tradition, that something that was handed down through generations disappeared here and there in different families and was replaced with someone who might not know anything writing a recipe and putting it online and having this blog that maybe they're not the person to listen to. Maybe an elder in your family trying to capture that content is really important for food, personally, obviously, but it's also a direct line into their culture and their experience, and it does start the ball rolling on conversation of things that are hard to just bring up out of nowhere and talk about, where if you talk about the food and then they think about when the last time they made that, and then just makes more organic conversation.
Yeah, it's like a Pandora's box in the good way. It just, it's interesting. In the United States, we tend to be individualists, and so we don't have multi-generational families living in a house anymore. And a lot of countries still do that, and so we do not. And I think we tend to flatter the youth and forget about, we don't want to look at older adults. To many, unfortunately, Americans, they see it physically instead of looking a little deeper into, all those lines. That's wisdom, that's experience. So, ask somebody, when was the first time you realized you had a gray hair?
Right.
How did that make you feel? Those types of things. When did you have to start wearing glasses? Those types of things. How did you handle your 13-year-old talking back to you. I'm not saying they did everything right, but I'm saying that's how we learn.
Perspective.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
Just having that different perspective.
Right.
In many countries, there is a reverence for the older generation and for those who've come before us.
Yeah, Finland, I read today, is the #1 country, and it's the happiest country. I don't know if it's because it's always cold, so they're always inside and they're warm and they're cooking. I don't know, but they really include. One of the key things there is all ages are included in everything. It's not expected because you're older that you won't attend, or you won't go swimming, or you won't because it's snowing out. Oh, that person can't go out. That's not how they live there, in the way the article explained it to me. And their apartment communities, they necessarily don't have retirement communities. They have apartment communities, and all the communities have more than one activity center. So it's not uncommon there that there will be an indoor swimming pool, there will be a cinema. All the things we see in our senior living communities, all ages live in that type of environment. And so they're interacting with all types of ages all the time. So it doesn't come across to them to discriminate, or I'm sure there is some of it, but they're perceived different.
Because everybody's mixing.
Yeah, they're not perceived to be any different than the 22-year-old as far as what they can do and what they cannot do.
Chef Chase, can you talk to us a little bit about what's happening? Because there's bacon and garlic is wafting through the air, and it's mixing with these fresh vegetables. I mean,
We'll get us caught up here. So we started with the bacon and the butter. It kind of released its fat into the warming pan, which we noted how lovely that smelled. But then I added carrots and onions to that, so it made it a little more complex. And as those got more tender, then I gave a little sprinkle of flour to pick up extra fat, and it'll be our thickener for the soup. And then I'm finishing it with our collard greens. And it looked like I just put a whole pound of collard greens in. They just cook down so much. It's important to put in more than you think just by eye. And then we're trying to get that kind of multi-layered, some sweetness, some garlic, some meatiness, but then I like the smell of the greens as they cook down. It's a whole different aroma complex that really makes us think of fresh food beyond what the other ingredients do.
and are you sauteing right now?
Saute would describe it adequately. I think of it as one step below saute. I'm just at a medium heat and just stirring it occasionally and making sure the bottom of my pan, it has a little color on it, but I'm okay with that because that color is good flavor. I just don't want it to burn, so I'm just keeping an eye on it, keeping it on that medium heat until everything cooks down, and then I got my stock at the ready to go into my next step. But one thing I wanted to show, you guys saw me do a few knife cuts. As long as they can fit on a spoon, I don't really care how square they are for a soup. So as long as you work through those. But then I also like using this tool. It's called a Microplane. And what it does is it's essentially a really small grater. And I like using it for things like garlic or citrus or cheese because I hate trying to mince this tiny little thing. So if you just run it through your Microplane, it just comes out in ribbons, and it's a lot easier on your dexterity and really faster anyways.
Let me ask your opinion as a chef, because a lot of times when I'm cooking down vegetables, my favorite is to use olive oil or to use butter. But I've also read that you could use water.
Yep, so I think of those as two different logic paths. That water we cook with because flavor can come into the water, and that's what a soup is. It's just flavorful water with stuff in it. That's what stock is. But then the oil is important to know when to use because it just helps take our heat from our stove, our flame, our element, whatever, and get it to the food. So it's mostly just like a pathway to the food. So you only need enough oil to get the heat to the food. It's not really doing much else. And olive oil has other good benefits, which makes it nice to think about using. I use olive oil anytime I'm just not going super high temperatures. Super high temperatures just kind of eliminate the purpose of olive oil. You just lose all the flavor and good things about it.
And the fat is good for you anyways because it's good for your cognitive development. I mean, you need a little fat in your diet.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you do. Absolutely. You can't eliminate sugar and you can't eliminate fats and all that stuff. And we have to have them. They're good for us. You just have to do it balanced. And what works for you. Everybody's a little different. So you have to figure out what works for you. And as you grow older, I can eat spicy food now. I could never eat it before, and that's because my taste buds have changed. So it's an individualized thing, I think, people's eating habits. And I know everybody says, oh, you're supposed to eat in the morning. Just when I get used to how we're supposed to do something, then something else comes out and says, no, you're supposed to fast for 12 hours. And I'm just like, forget it. I'll just do what works for me. And that's,
Absolutely, and that's what they tell you, to do what works for you, because as you mentioned before, what is old is new again, and everything's repackaged. So yesterday's diet is today's keto.
Yep.
Yesterday's something else. Yesterday's caveman is today's paleo. And so really it's about what your body needs. And I find as I've gotten older, I'm better at listening. So before I had all these rules that I had to follow, and I had so many rules, I think that I wasn't even eating things that I liked. Because I was eating, okay, I gotta eat salmon, and I gotta eat this, and I gotta eat this much, and before I know it, I'm trying to eat 12 cups of vegetables a day, and that's not really good for your system, let me just mention. And so, it's like, eat what's good for your body and eat what feels good to you, and trust that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't like to diet. I don't know anybody that does. I'm not buying it that it works. I've tried them and I always put the weight right back on. So I've just gotten to the point where if I want to eat, I eat. If I don't want to eat, it's okay to sit at a table with friends and other people are eating. And it's okay not to clean your plate. I think we have learned that from the last generation, that it's okay. You can choose to eat it all or you can leave some of it. So.
Well, there was a study that I've been following, and it's this 10-year study. And what it did was it followed diabetics of various ages. And so they had one group that was just eating healthy whole food. That was just the whole thing. And then they had the other group that was following the traditional diet that's recommended by the American Medical Association. And what they found after 10 years is the group that was just eating whole foods, every single person in that group came off their medication. And then the group that was following a traditional diet, all of their need for medication increased.
Interesting.
And so it was really interesting and the group that started eating whole food became better in tune with what they liked and what they wanted to eat. And so there wasn't this desire to it changed the reason that they were eating. So they stopped overeating.
Right, I think
I love that you came full circle there.
the best thing I ever heard, and I do this, is, and it works, I think if you take a bite and put your silverware down and enjoy the bite, I tend to not eat as much because I'm giving my stomach time to get full instead of inhaling the food. And then I'm still hungry or whatever, and milk tends to fill me up, so if I don't want to eat a lot, I'll have a glass of milk. And there's all little things, I think, but it's listening to your body. I don't know if milk fills everybody else up. I just know if I drink a glass of it, I'm usually full by the time they serve the main course. So,
or even just enjoying the experience. If you travel anywhere, I've done a little bit of traveling, mealtime is an experience. Whereas many times in the United States, it's something that you get through, everybody's done in about a good 9-10 minutes. So sitting down, enjoying the meal, enjoying the company. One of the things that I did in my family as I was raising my kids is being very intentional about having dinner together every night. Yep. And so we'd have to say a high point and a low point. It's where I got all my good info from the kids, just listening to them talk about what happened and who was doing what at school. It was just a really great way to connect. And eating a meal is about connecting.
Right. I think depending on where you're from, and even in the United States, for us, socializing was around the table. So, Sunday after church, we picked a restaurant, and we didn't leave that restaurant 10 or 15 minutes. And then during the work week, I remember once or twice a week we didn't do it every night, but at least once or twice we'd have a meal around a table. And so, and those were the best times. Those are the things I remember. I don't remember the 5-minute grab a sandwich and back out the door because I had to go to practice for something. I don't remember those times, but I remember sitting around the table and what we talked about and what my relatives sounded like and even what they looked like at that time. I think it's important. I think it creates memories.
It does. I think it's important to ask ourselves the why. So when we're spending time with our loved ones, especially our loved ones who are a little bit older, why are we here? Are we here just to eat and scarf our food and eat grandma's delicious pie that she always makes so perfectly? Or can we take some time and enjoy the moment and how grandma sounds and why she made this recipe and just really being in the moment? And I think that's why so many people are excited about the holidays, just those memories and being in the moment.
Well, it's a reason to stop. It's, people take time off work, they take the time to do the shopping. I don't know who said it, but, it takes forever to make a meal, 10 hours, and then it's gone in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Well, I hope not. I hope your family got to sit around and at least took an hour or so to sit around the table and enjoy it. But that says something about our society and our culture. We don't value the experience, like you said, and we should, because that's what it is. It's a time to just sit around and enjoy each other. So I think that's what the holidays do, because I don't think we as Americans slow down enough during our workday. We're connected to too many things, 24/7.
Sometimes expecting to slow down is not like reality. Like, we're all super busy, so if we can try to structure in without compromising work or something else that we're staying busy, let's figure out how to bring back the things that we know are important for our health, our psychology, our culture, like cooking, and doing it in a manner that we can take the time to cook in this time we've reserved, but then also get the benefits of that the next day and then 3 days later and then a week later, both nutritionally and practically. Like, make a soup and then have it every other day for every third meal or whatever. Give it to someone else and have a soup exchange.
Right, so that's the other thing. So at Homestead, we have the Ready to Care site, and you can sign up to get a text message once a week that gives you suggestions on what you can do for an aging adult person. And one of those things I struggled with is when our children left the home, how do you make a meal for 2 people? What do you mean don't cook 4 pounds of hamburger for spaghetti? What? So if you're in that situation, that's a good thing, because then you can take the leftovers and maybe there is an elderly person living on your street or something. It's okay, take them the meal. What's it gonna hurt? Nothing. They're gonna like it. And you're going through a process of learning how to scale down recipes. I think I still haven't quite figured it out, but
it's tricky.
Yeah.
It's a process.
Yeah.
As I'm learning myself, as the members in my household are shrinking, as people are growing up, it's a process.
Yeah, and I make my kids come home at least once a month on Sundays. I try. For this Sunday is our family, and we're going to have spaghetti, and everybody's bringing something. So, and they're getting excited because my phone is blowing up with text messages. So, and one daughter's making apple cider. I'm like, okay,
that's fun.
That's interesting. This ought to be good, So I think it's fun how I was never a big cook, but 2 of my children love to cook. And the other 2,
nutritionists.
Yeah, the other 2, no, not so much. But yeah, so it's fun to see what they come up with because they didn't get it from me.
Well, Shan, you had mentioned before that sometimes you referred to it as cheating, but I've been thinking about what you said when you buy maybe your favorite soup and then you bring it home and you add something to it. I think that it's just adjusting to regular life. So there may be some times on the weekend when I can make a homemade soup from scratch. And then other times it's really helpful to stop by the grocery store and get some pre-made cut up vegetables and start my soup that way.
Yeah, I have never been a good soup maker, never. I don't know how you can screw it up, but I can do that. So I just found I have a brand of soup that I really like, and they have a lot of different types, and so I just take that, throw it in the crock pot, and then I'll cut up more stew meat, more potatoes, more of what's already in there, and add it and let it go all day while I'm at work. And I get a thicker soup, and everybody likes it. In fact, talk about traditions, there is one, it's a cheese spicy soup that, for years everybody thought I made it from scratch, and then they busted me out. They found the cans in the garbage. But all I did was add to it. I just took what was already there and just added the same things. But they didn't know it was canned because it was thicker, and there was more of it. So.
Yeah.
Well, we started a new tradition in our family a couple of years ago. I wanted pumpkin, but I really just didn't want pumpkin pie. I didn't want anything sweet. So I made this huge thing of pumpkin soup, and I just kind of did it on my own. I had some maple sausage in there. Wow. I had some different vegetables, and then I put some pumpkin seeds on top. And now it's one of my family's favorites, and I did not think anyone would want to eat a savory pumpkin soup.
Did you measure?
I did not measure anything.
See, and then they ask you how you made it, and you're like, well, a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
It was like a fun way to experiment when I didn't want anything sweet. And I can't now, my family, the weather's changing, and so I've already made it twice because it's been requested.
Cool.
Oh, nice.
But now that you make it the second time, you write it down and get a little better every time.
Yeah, it does get a little better every time because I get requests. So the last time I made it, my kids are like, more vegetables. And so they're getting older because before they were like, too many vegetables. Now they're like, Mom, you need more vegetables in here.
And isn't it funny how I think I like thicker soups. Some people don't like, they almost, they want them real watery. And I'm like, I think a soup, like I said earlier, is the main dish. And I find that with a lot of things like spaghetti and those types of things. It's funny how different people like different things made. It's the same thing, it's just made maybe a little differently.
Tweaked a little bit here, left or right.
Over the years,
Okay, Chef Chase, what are you doing?
It actually played right into what you were talking about. That as I was finishing this, I'm like, it's not quite as thick as I was hoping for. I'm just a little off on my sprinkle. So what I did is I just mixed a little bit of oil with a little bit of flour. And then if you stream that into a soup as it comes to a simmer, it'll just get thicker. So you just leave it at a simmer, and if you make a recipe and you're like, oh, it's like just weird broth, like I want like soup, then this is a good way to do that.
Well, do you have any other tips? I mean, I have some kind of things that I've picked up along the way. Like sometimes you mention old potatoes. If I have potato salad or not potato salad, but mashed potatoes, I might add that to thicken the soup a little bit.
Totally, yeah. There's a big history of using like day-old last meal type things to make a new soup. That's what like bisque is with rice. You use it to thicken. Or beans is super popular too. Bean soups, even garbanzo soups, you might smash some of those beans and put them in. There's all sorts of ways to use a little bit of old food. It's not like it's old and bad, but you repurpose it in a way that makes something that was even better than your first meal.
Gotcha.
Using yesterday's food today. And that's a very good sustainable practice.
Yeah, that's a good slogan. Wow. So I was making chili. I made sweet chili with sugar a couple weeks ago.
Really? A sweet chili?
And it had jalapenos in it too. It turned out really well.
Oh.
It turned out really well. I was surprised. But my grandma used sugar in her goulash.
Wow.
So it was not a foreign concept to me. But
well, they have like a jalapeno jelly.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. So good. You can put it on crackers or your bread in the morning. Yes.
Well, the thing that I love about soups is how easy you can adjust it. So say, for example, if you have someone who can't eat or chew very well, then you can put vegetables in there that'll soften down really nicely.
Yep, smaller vegetables are easier to pick up with a spoon or different types of eating utensils if you need a different unique eating utensil for an individual.
So I have a question. Is there a reason why soups are when people are sick? Why is chicken noodle soup?
That's a great question.
I'm just curious. Why is that the soup?
I can go down a little bit of my expertise on that. So soups are different than most of our other meals. Like there's usually just way more stuff in them going on. And the beauty of that is you're getting more nutrition per square footage, if you will, per square inch. And oftentimes it has a lot of complicated interaction of spices and vegetables and things that are bitter, like collard greens that we don't like eating normally, but allows the nutrition and all those little health benefits of the spices and greens to come together in a meal that gives us kind of way more bang for our buck as we eat it. And it just happens to be easier to eat. So when we're sick, preparing a meal of a bunch of different things is just taxing.
Right.
And then soup just filled that human need and nutritional need perfectly.
Oh, interesting.
And then is there anything with like the heat, with like the broth, I know sometimes I like to make things a little spicy if I'm stuffed up a little bit.
Yep, spicy is great at that. It kind of, oftentimes when we're sick, it lowers our ability to taste because it kind of clogs our head up. And oftentimes we can't feel focused, or we can't smell or taste good. And having something warm solves that, but then having the warmness with the spiciness kind of takes it the last step and really clears this out in a way that every bite you take feels a little better, tastes a little bit better. By the time the end of the bowl, you feel like you're back to normal, and then hopefully you stay normal, or you have another bowl of soup later.
And it's so comforting. Like there are certain foods that are comforting, and soup just feels like one of those comforting foods.
Yeah, and I don't, we always want it in the fall and colder days, but soup's really good in the summer too. But if you say to me, do you want a bowl of soup? It would really depend on the type of soup. If it's the summertime, in the wintertime, I'm more open to try any type of soup. But in the summer, and I don't know if it's just because it appears visually just hotter to us, and we traditionally eat it in colder climates. There's no reason, is what I'm saying.
Some of that's cultural. That like if you grew up with soups that are hot and hearty, eating them in the summer doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
But there's a lot of cultures that the soups originated in warm climates 24/7 all year long, that the soups actually cool you down even though it's a hot soup. So I think of one Vietnamese pho. It's like a hot beef broth, but it has cilantro and basil, so it's cooling, and it's kind of aromatics as you eat it.
Interesting.
Well, Chef Chase, we have a question.
Please.
What are some good starter meals for someone on the pickier side?
Ooh. So I'm going to start with the soup conversation still. That soups can have a lot of ingredients in it, kind of like what I'm doing here, or a chili. But soups can also be kind of one-dimensional, simple, like tomato soup, cauliflower soup, something like cream of mushroom, or just a broth-based soup. I know when I'm really sick, I just want a can of chicken broth, and that's it. So if you're picky, starting with one or two ingredient soup is really good, and then figuring out what you want to add to it, or starting with a starch, something like garbanzo beans or rice or beans that you love, and then add one little thing to it to see if you like it together, and then one more thing.
And then that question's interesting to me because most people would think of a child with that question, but if it's an older adult that maybe has moved in with a child or into a community, and they appear to be picky, the best thing is to ask them why. There's a reason they're picky, and maybe they have an allergy, or maybe I don't like watermelon. I ate too much of it when I was a kid and became ill. Still don't like it, So there's a reason why I don't like watermelon. So I would suggest they sit down and talk to the person, and then if they're going to make a soup, find out what they do like and see if you can make a dish or a soup out of stuff they do like, and then ask them, can we throw this in you taste it and see if you like that as well. So that may be able, but I doubt you're going to change an older person's pickiness. It's pretty set in their ways, and maybe they just didn't get a lot of different flavors in their youth, and so they're set in their ways, and that's okay too.
That's super common. The average American, if I remember my statistic right, only eats 20 fruits and vegetables. That they just cycle through the same 20, some less, some more. But then if you try to introduce something new to their palate list, if it's really out of left field, then it's not going to taste good to them. They've never had it. But maybe if something very similar, just a little variation on this, you love apples, but you've never had this type of apple, that's a good way to maybe give a little bit of difference that might excite the palate or the diet when you might be sick of eating the same old apple.
Right. And maybe they have a sore tooth.
That's a good one.
Yep, that's another.
That there's kind of hidden messages in what you want to eat. Maybe you haven't realized something's wrong, so you find yourself eating all soft foods. Well, let's think about why your brain went there.
Yeah, a lot of people have eating, they eat a certain thing or they eat things and then their stomach's upset and they don't know why. So they start staying away from things instead of trying to figure out how to cure the problem.
Yep.
So.
And oftentimes avoidance diet, you end up grouping too many things in that you don't know whether that was the thing that caused the issue, but you're scared to go back to it.
Right.
Gluten is a big one right now that everyone might think gluten's why they don't feel good, so they just assume it rather than trying to go about it a little bit more purposefully.
Well, and I've read that it's a small part of our population that has a gluten intolerance.
Super small.
Right.
But it's a fat. It's a
Yep.
thing. And it's actually bad for you because, we need that wheat. It's wheat, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Hey, Chef Chase, we have another question for you. What are some kitchen tools that make making soup easier?
Good. If you paid attention to what I was cooking in, it's a very heavy pan. There's different brands, Le Creuset, Saab, but it's a Dutch oven more or less. It could be coated or called enameled, but the point is it's a big heavy pot that it's hard to burn stuff in, and it keeps its heat well. It cooks from all kind of directions that it holds heat. I love cooking with these. I have an old Dutch oven from my mother when she cooked more, and then I'm like, you know what, when I'm moving out, I'm taking that because I love it. I got her another one, but something like that, a big heavy pot is a good place to start a soup. It allows you to control heat and work up on flavor.
Now, what about incorporating an Instapot or a slow cooker?
That's good. So I do use pressure cookers at home, and I love pressure cookers when I just don't have time to let this stew for an hour or whatever it might be. Or I do have a dried bean or something. They can get those done just lickety-split quick. But the crock pot, I think, kind of has got a bad name on and off. But a crock pot was invented to cook beans. That's its original purpose. It was just called a bean cooker. And then they started being like, we're not selling enough bean cookers. Let's figure out how to
Well, the
get
Instapot
people...
is a pressure cooker. Somebody
Yep.
reinvented the
exactly.
pressure. Yeah.
I'm like, what's this Instapot thing? I just have this old rickety
It wasn't it a
cooker.
pan with the lid and you tighten the lid? Yeah.
Clicks
And the
right
lid
on.
might blow off if you're...
Right.
There's a lot of fear
Not-
of pressure cookers,
yeah.
and some of that's warranted. You don't just throw it on high heat and walk away. Keep an eye on it. That's a big one. But both of those are amazing tools that they have a different name than they used to be called 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago. Instapot's super new, but they do a technique that we all know, and they're just figuring out how to apply it.
And sometimes what I'll use too is I have a blender, a higher end blender, and if I really kind of don't feel like chopping my vegetables, I'll just chop them in there.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
A food processor is good for that. A blender is good if you're just going to end up blending the soup later anyways,
Yeah.
maybe. A pureed, mashed style soup, for sure. And those blenders usually come with a really good list of recipes. Whether when you bought it or if you go online and just search whatever brand you have, I can almost guarantee they're going to have some recipes for you.
If someone makes cauliflower mashed potatoes, if they don't use a blender, I don't like them. I don't know why. I don't know why. If it's just that I need it to be a lot like a mashed potato.
The texture, yeah.
Yeah, but I did find that I was in Florida this year, and we ate at a Cuban restaurant, and they brought out this. I thought it was potatoes, and it had a different texture. It had like a pear texture, but it tasted like potatoes. It was a cactus.
Oh, interesting.
Oh.
Yucca.
Yeah, that would make
it
sense.
was so good. I
Yep.
can't get it here.
Oh, wow. Or that.
That's hard to find here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had the yucca or
So good.
nogales. Is that?
I don't recognize
know.
that one.
But that's what, when I asked the waitress, that's what they substitute for their potatoes.
Yep, plantains is my favorite.
I love plantains,
Plantains too, yes.
So delicious.
A little sweet, a little starchy.
Yep.
Checks a lot of boxes.
But anyway, that was off the subject.
Yep.
Well,
Fun detour.
I'll use a blender too. Sometimes, so I have, I'll use my blender to make a broth. So my blender, supposedly you can make a soup in it, but I don't like the texture. And it doesn't have that richness and that depth of flavor when I make it in the blender. So I'll make it in the blender and then throw it in the pressure cooker.
Is
Yeah,
it because
that's
it takes the nutrition out of, is it blended too much? And is it true that you can almost take the flavors out of something by?
Kind of, you're getting there. So when you blend something, it just kind of taking a piece and getting it smaller, 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 and smaller. So it seems like it got cooked because the texture changed, but really without heat, certain flavor chemicals won't separate and reattach to other ones. That's the difference between something feeling like it's been stewed and cared for versus something that just got pureed to mimic a soup. That's good.
Interesting.
Well, and can you offer some suggestions on taking some of those flavors, like the canned flavors, and making them taste a little more homemade? Like I know most of the time I'll use fresh tomatoes just because I don't like the kind of, to me, it's kind of a tinny tomato flavor.
Totally.
And so I prefer fresh, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Making things taste a little bit better.
Yep, the good blanket statement for almost all canned foods we buy or packaged in some way is the less sodium that the producer puts in it, the more freedom you have to work with it and make it better. So buying low sodium isn't only good for controlling your sodium, but it's good for me as a cook because I want to control how much salt in it, or do I put something else that has salt in it, like a sausage, things like that. So controlling where your sodium or salt comes from. It also helps diminish that metallic mineraliness of some products in a good way. And some of it's knowing the difference between some simple words like broth versus stock versus bone broth.
Now, what is the difference?
Right? It feels the same to everyone who just walks through the aisle and you're like, this is really confusing. The technical difference is broth is cooked with some sort of meat, so it has a little bit more, I don't know, meatiness to its flavor. It's usually seasoned much more heavily. Bone broth is kind of this in-between of meat and stock, because stock is just bones and almost low seasoning. So the problem is some of the companies abuse the words. That they might call it stock, but then on the label they have with added sodium. So really it's more like a broth then. So some of it is paying attention to your product. And if you see low sodium, it's a good sign on any of those names that it's a good go-to.
See, so low sodium isn't taking flavor away.
No, it's giving you the opportunity to introduce it when you want it.
Right, because you think, you're taking something away.
Right.
You know, like light Miracle Whip, light butter. I'm like, you're taking the flavor away, but maybe you're not. I didn't know that.
Yeah, some of them, it'll taste different, but that's usually how you figure out how to apply it to different things then.
Gotcha.
But actually, now that you say that, it makes sense because a lot of the highly processed foods, they add salt and add sugar just to give them flavor. And so having it low sodium, now that you say that, that makes absolute sense.
Yeah, it was this caraway effect. They're like, we're just going to put a pinch in to make it a little better, and then it sold more. All right, we're going to put more and more and more until our diets had crazy amounts of sodium in it, and that's why everyone started having to watch their sodium.
Gotcha. All right.
Extra added salt.
I didn't know that.
So Chef Chase, how's the soup doing?
So we're just simmering. It looks like my flame just ran out. Just simmering on low. I'm gonna kind of tend to it every once in a while, but it's doing great and just stewing away. At this point, I could portion it out and cool it down, or I could serve it, or I could stew it another 30, 40 minutes, whatever my day meant.
I'm feeling, from the feedback from the last time, that we have to give a review of this soup. Now, that's just the feedback we got the last time.
Good.
Like, could you please do that?
Dish you up. I should taste it one more time before I do so.
Okay. I'm sure it's amazing.
Follow my own rules.
And then, so what could you freeze this soup and bring it out a month
That's a good
later?
conversation on what soups can be frozen, which ones hold up longer. Soups that don't have fresh meats in them, like you're cooking the meats from raw, typically hold up longer in the fridge. So like using sausages is a good way to increase the life in the fridge. And soups that have dairy in them traditionally do not freeze well. They might separate when you freeze them.
Okay.
And it's always a might. You can try, but know that it might separate.
Okay. Good to know.
Well, and maybe, do you think it's a good idea to freeze certain ingredients to have a quick soup starter?
That's a really good point. That I have stock at home that sometimes I buy it, sometimes I make it, but then I just freeze it and pull out what I need when I need. And that could be stock, or it could be some other base to a soup that you can build up from. There's a bunch of ways to go about it.
And one thing I was going to ask you about is, so this time of year, certain times I'll go into the grocery store and there are certain things on sale. So maybe potatoes are on sale or zucchini are on sale. Do you have any good suggestions for storing or freezing so that I could add those things to a soup later if I know I'm not going to use it all because I bought it because it was on sale?
You get a little bit more tricky there, that not everything you can just freeze as you bought it if you bought it fresh. That a lot of the things we buy already frozen has been made in a way that freezes better. I don't have a good blanket answer, to be honest, for that one. That is a challenge. So knowing and having a little bit of planning ahead that if I'm buying something that is perishable, and I care enough to have that be a fresh product, that you try to treat it with the respect of a fresh product. In worst case scenario, you make a quick soup and then you just freeze the soup if you're not planning on eating that week.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask you about it, because there are some vegetables that I'm a texture person and I love like something crunchy, something like just the variety of texture. And sometimes I find if I freeze vegetables that it's not the texture that I want. Say for example, zucchini.
Yeah, that's a huge
zucchini
one.
To me doesn't quite.
Whoever said it could be noodles?
That is an interesting trend.
That's just not right.
I agree that some vegetables, they're not meant to freeze super well. Zucchini is a good example. It just kind of goes to mush, but it even goes to mush when we cook it. So
yeah.
But other things hold up for super long. Like if you buy a big bag of carrots, it's gonna stay in your fridge forever and it'll be great. Even if they get a little wobbly, they're still great to use. Celery's the same way. Onions are pretty good too.
Maybe that's why people jar or can. What?
Yep, I mean that's where.
And it's a jar. I don't understand.
And that's where canning in cans and jars came from.
Right.
Absolutely.
Chef, as a chef, do you get caught up in the trends? So Shan said something that just reminded me, we have these zucchini noodles. I accidentally bought a healthy breakfast sandwich that had a cauliflower bun, and I decided that no one needs a cauliflower bun.
Yeah, no disrespect, but it's like, what is happening right now?
The market's getting super diversified, that there's products that we've always known to be one thing, rice. And now there's other non-rice rices.
Right.
I think it's my responsibility to try them and weigh them and figure out where they are useful. But there's a lot that aren't super useful unless you just have a super specific diet. So if you happen to be celiac and can't have gluten or this or that, like true allergies or limitations, if those help those people, then great, but maybe not for everyone.
I watched a cooking show, and this gal made a gluten-free cake on a cake-off show, and the judges were really impressed.
Oh, that's good.
It was
that's hard.
Yes, that's what they were saying.
Yeah.
I was like, why? It's supposed to, it's not, why?
Well,
some of that is
but I'm the dietary.
hard,
so
right?
Yes,
if you don't have a restriction or an allergy, it's like, why are you reinventing the wheel?
Right.
But if you can get it done and it's just as good, then kudos to that person.
Yeah.
Well, Shan, it's time to try the soup. And while you're trying the soup, I just want to let everyone know that on our next Home Instead Aging Well series, we will have Lakeland Hoagland. She is a caregiver advocate. You may have seen her on the Dr. Phil show, and she will be joining us next time as we talk about all things nutrition, and we enjoy another delicious meal with Chef Chase. I think that I had better try this before we go.
All right.
Let's see, it's so delicious. It's the perfect amount of thickness that I enjoy.
Still a broth base, not like
This
thick
is
starchy soup.
amazing.
It's very good.
It is amazing. Thank you so much, Chef Chase, for all of your insight and wisdom. Shan, thank you for all of your nutritional information. Appreciate it so much. We will see you all next week on the next part of our Home Instead Aging Well culinary series. Thank you so much. Have a great day.